All right, well, thanks for joining everyone. Again, my name is Alexa Buffoli. I am the Program Director of Evolve Danville, RTC. Thank you again for joining. These slides are actually going to be available in the next week, so check out your email for the slides. And again, if you have any questions along the way that you'd like answered, I will be responding to the Q&A at the end. If you're having any type of technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chat, and me or Kara will also be able to respond and help you out there. All right. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about Evolve. I'll give a little background, who we treat and what we do. I've been working with Evolve for almost 2 years, and I work in the Residential Treatment Center in Danville. We treat 12 to 17-year-olds, all genders, who are struggling with different mental health issues and or substance use issues. We're dual diagnosis in that way, which is really cool. And Evolve actually offers a platform of different levels of care. The highest being a residential treatment center, which is what I run. We're short-term, 30 to 60 days. It's 24/7 being at a house. And then a step down, which we typically, go into afterwards, is a partial hospitalization program, a PHP. And that is where the client is reintegrated back into home and then spends the majority of the day with receiving mental health services. And then a step down would be our intensive outpatient unit, IOP. Yes, everything is an acronym. And that is the lowest level of care, which is where the client is fully integrated into home and school and then receives mental health services in the afternoons. Our therapeutic approach, we have a lot of different things that we like to pull from. We're extremely dynamic. We're heavily rooted in dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. But we also sprinkle in cognitive behavior therapy. We have a lot of different group therapy and group modalities that we offer, including seeking safety, relapse prevention, anger management. Obviously a huge part of what we do at Evolve is the family unit and the family therapy component, which is actually kind of what gave me the idea of this webinar today. And I hope to share kind of some of my experiences and themes that have come up in family therapy to really help you all at home. And then another really interesting kind of approach that Evolve does is the experiential therapy. So we have a lot of different, mind body modalities that we do to kind of activate the body, activate the senses, and hopefully allow kids to express themselves creatively. Moving into the topic today, how to get your teen to talk to you. This is really broad, and yet this is the core of a lot of family systemic issues. And so I figured I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges, a little bit about the change that happens, especially when kids enter this preteen or teenhood. And then how can we really, as parents or as family members, reestablish a connection with our teens and learn how to support one another, build the trust, build the foundation so that no matter what happens, you know how to support one another. All right, so I split this into two parts. First, let's just really understand what teens are going through. So there's this then versus now. There's this expression that I love using, which is you were their world and now you're just living in it. Right. So, back in the day when your kids were young, they needed you and they looked up to you. They needed help solving all of their problems. They needed, the basic needs of life, and you were able to provide it. You were their world. Right. And then all of a sudden, as teens, as children are moving into their adolescence, the focus shifts. And all of a sudden, I think parents are left wondering, what is my role? If anything, I feel like I'm in the way versus being able to support these kids. So I just wanted to have a little background as far as what is truly going on when they are moving into the adolescence, right? So obviously we know there's huge hormonal shifts. There's stress hormones, sex hormones, and growth hormones playing out, right? And I remember reading somewhere that it's something like for males entering adolescence, it's 10 times higher testosterone than they've ever experienced. That's being condensed into this adolescent teenhood. So if you can imagine 10 times testosterone, I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? Obviously, there's body changes, and with body changes comes a lot of emotional or mental health um, struggles and understanding. It's happening really. It's happening whether they want it to or not, and then they're left in the dust, kind of trying to understand or process it, right? Um, there's also when stress is involved, especially around adolescents, they have a significantly increased cortisol that's pumping through their system, which really impacts their rational brain when responding to different stimuli. Um, I wanted to talk a little briefly about I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty of the mind. I could talk all day about it, but there's the prefrontal cortex and then the limbic system. So obviously the prefrontal cortex, that's where we make all of our decisions, our good judgments, we're thinking through decisions. And unfortunately, that doesn't get fully developed until we're in our 20s, right? So when we're looking at adolescents, we're asking them to be adults, look like adults, make adult decisions, and yet their brains legitimately are not developed in that way to be able to make those good decisions all the time. On the flip side, the limbic system, which is all of their like emotions, impulses, it's in overdrive. Their amygdala is in overdrive. So that means, you know, we talk a lot about in DBT this concept of rational mind versus emotion mind. And our goal is to get wise mind, right? We want to connect the rational thinking, which is the prefrontal cortex, and the emotion mind, because emotions are important too. They're communicating something to us in our limbic system. The goal is how do we look at both of those and make decisions in our wise mind? And for teens, this is really hard because all of this is shifting and they don't understand it. One other thing I did want to point out for adolescents is this is the onset of a lot of different disorders, right? So I remember reading somewhere where they did a study on like adolescent rats versus adult rats, and they actually noticed that adolescent rats can become addicted to nicotine faster and at lower doses than adult rats, which I think speaks to this reward system and how adolescents actually respond differently to different drugs than adults. There's also been a lot of brain scans or brain studies that show adolescents are hypersensitive to novel stimuli. So this is talking about really why they're really seeking like thrill-seeking experiences and behaviors. This enforces it, right? I liked this quote. So between 11 and 14, there definitely is a shift. It's a profound time of identity formation where they start to rely on their peer groups and pull away from some of the ways of the past to become their own person. This is all of a sudden, right? So when we as parents used to be their world, we're now seeing this shift and we're almost left on the outside looking in, and their world is now very much them and their peer groups, whoever they are feeling connected to, whether it's an online community or in school. I know COVID has greatly impacted, face-to-face connection. And I think as families, we're all seeing a lot of it go more into this online culture, which can feel really scary. And yet teens feel really supported sometimes through it. There was a psych experiment done to kind of explore this, where they had adolescents and adults take a driving simulation test where you could win a reward or something by running a yellow light and then stopping right before you hit a wall. And the interesting part is for adolescents, everything was even with adults, but once the adolescents had a peer group or other adolescents watching, they took extra chances and they took extra risks by running that yellow light because they're so heavily influenced by their peer group. So that all being said, right, why are they not talking to us as parents or as family members or as guardians? And I tried to think of the main sources or the main reasons that I've heard time and time again when clients are coming to us at RTC, or, in my history, I used to work at PHP. So reason one, they don't want to overwhelm or worry you. Teens they're really intuitive, even though sometimes it seems like they're egocentric and thinking only about themselves. They're actually extremely intuitive of the world around them. And even if it feels like they're not paying attention, they are watching you. They're watching everyone around you. I even I even with my staff train them, because I say, I'm like, when they're at RTC, they're watching how you engage with them, with others, with each other as coworkers. So, if you have other family members, they're taking in and they're assessing and they're trying to make sense of how you engage the world. So if they know you're already at your limit, or you're having a lot on your plate and they feel it in your body language, right, which is 80% of our communication, they may not want to worry you more, right? They're trying to protect you in their own way. And yet what you feel is actually this wall up. And so there's this miscommunication that's really happening. Reason 2, they don't want you to fix it. So I'm going to come back to this time and time again throughout this. But this is a key reason that comes out in family therapy, right? When they were in elementary school, it was totally fine for you to fight their battles and talk to their teacher if they were really struggling with someone, or talk to their friends' parents if they felt like they were being picked on or bullied. But now through their adolescence and through their teenhood, no way. They do not want you to be a part of it. They don't even want you to know that there's any issues. They don't want you to fix it, right? They want to experience their own battles, and in some sense, right, this is good. We want to foster independence. We want them to be able to grow into themselves and into their sense of self, so that they know how to fix their own problems. And then ideally, as families or as parents, we get to sit back and support them and align with them along the way, right? Reason 3, they don't want you to get mad. This one's pretty basic, and yet it's true, right? Like they know, again, they're intuitive, right? They know that there are certain behaviors or certain things that we as families will not tolerate, and they don't want to be the one to tell you. And they also, whether they admit it or not, are seeking approval from you. And so anything that could jeopardize that or take it away in some regard, they're going to avoid it, right? They're going to tiptoe around it and maybe just stop talking to you, so that hopefully it can be swept under the rug and they don't actually have to address it. And that may be part of them with their prefrontal cortex not wanting to take accountability or own it. Who knows? And reason 4, you won't understand. And I think in some regards, this is a little bit of a defense mechanism that teens can have. It's easier to say someone won't understand, so I'm not going to try, than actually try and feel all of the feelings or hear things that might upset them further. But this is a typical universal disconnect, I think, between parents and teens. And I don't know if any of you have felt that way, or any of these reasons, when you think of being a teen and thinking about your parents in different situations, if any of these reasons kind of speak true to you. All right. So I think this one's interesting, right? I wanted to kind of highlight that idea of fostering independence and how you were their world versus now their world seems to be this bubble of friends or some sort of community, and you're kind of on the outside, right? There was a study done where it was taken by a poll of a few thousand teens, and it was, I'm currently lying to my parents about X. So you can kind of see where this is coming from. Which is exactly why in RTC or even in PHP, IOP, all of them, we do group therapy. That we know that these kids are most impacted by their peers. And so that's why I love running groups. It's a safe, non-judgmental place for teens to open up, lean on one another. And even though they don't have the exact same issues or experiences, somehow just feeling validated or heard by a peer, someone else in their age range, creates so much healing and change. So when I'm facilitating groups, I do my best to really take a step back, pose a question, open it up, and have them, learn how to support one another. It is way more impactful than me trying to tell them or guide them to the answer. And I also want to normalize, because of COVID, this has really eliminated those normal teen experiences that they have gotten. So now we kind of understand a little bit about what's coming into play when we're looking at our relationship with teens and our kids. But now I want to talk a little bit about truly what can we do, right? What can we do to kind of get back to a place of understanding and support and guidance. So the parent-teen relationship. A study has found that 70% of parents say they struggle to communicate meaningfully with their kids. And I think I just want to highlight the term meaningfully, right? So, and 70% of parents, I mean, that's a good amount. But when you're thinking of truly what meaningful conversation looks like, just in general, right? Let's take kids out of it. It's less on yes or no questions or logisticals of like, did you do your homework? Are you hungry? How's your day or whatever. And it's more about meaningful conversation. Maybe it's exploring values or their thoughts on life. I feel like I love working with teens because I feel like oftentimes they're on this like existential journey of who am I in this world, who do I want to be, and they're assessing all the other people in their lives and trying to make sense of it, right? So when I think of a meaningful conversation, it's asking those why questions or those value questions or something that you just get insight into the way your teen is putting together a cause and effect, right? That's what's going to be true connection. One thing too, I wanted to point out in family therapy that I see a lot is this pendulum or this spectrum, I guess, of how we interact with our teens. And I feel like on the one side of the spectrum, there's this pitfall or trap where parents almost have this sense of they need to keep their kids on a need to know basis. And what's interesting about that, right, is teens, again, because I work with teens mostly, on their side, they feel like because of parents, having this concept of telling them on a need to know basis, like, no, you can't hang out with that friend, or no, you need to go to bed at this point, but without really elaborating like the understanding or the why or the decision making behind it, they feel as though their parents are not being transparent with them. And in turn, what that turns into is they feel like they can't totally trust them. And it's almost doing this disservice where kids then can't develop their own understanding of why do you say no or why do we do this, and it stunts maybe their ability to make decisions or even communicate boundaries moving forward. And then I think on the other side, I also see, understandably, right, there's this oversharing. So they're like, maybe in our history we had a parent who was really authoritative and didn't want to elaborate and was really structured and really very minimally emotionally involved. I may swing to the other side of the spectrum as a parent and overcompensate, which looks like maybe I'm oversharing, or maybe there's this enmeshment that I have with my teen where, yes, I may feel extremely close to them. I tell them how I'm feeling and I'm processing things with them. And yet sometimes what that can do is, if there is this enmeshment, your teen then ends up being parentified and has to almost emotionally take care of the parent. And that's also not good, right? So let me think of an example that has played out, right? So let's say parents are going through a separation and one parent is really emotionally struggling, which is normal, right? That is valid. And yet they turn to someone that they feel very close to, or maybe they have felt distant to, and they want so badly to reconnect with their teen that they turn towards them as their emotional support, right? And they share their pain, they share their anger, they share their frustration with what's happening. The kid, though, again, probably because of a lot of different things, right? Their hormones are out of control. They're in their emotion mind. They don't have a prefrontal cortex that's fully developed. They then all of a sudden feel as though their responsibility is to take care of that parent. They put their feelings on hold. They sweep them under the rug so that they can be present and be a caretaker. We use this term emotional caretaker. It's this role reversal that happens. And all of a sudden, they struggle to share their feelings because they don't want to burden you, right? It goes back to those reasons why. They don't want to burden you. They don't want to upset you in any way. And so they end up just pulling away, right? They're maybe like physically and emotionally present for you, and yet they have a really hard time maybe taking down that wall and feeling like it's safe to be vulnerable or to share things that maybe could be upsetting to hear. 82% of parents actually feel like their kid avoids talking to them if they don't have to. 82%. So one, I keep coming back to, like, I want to normalize that this is a normal part of development. Parents and teens are going to take a little bit of a distance, right? A little bit of a split as our teens develop and, build this sense of confidence and independence on being able to make decisions for their lives. And yet there's this like thing that happens where all of a sudden it feels like the parent is the enemy and like everything bad is going towards the parent, and then they just end up avoiding each other. So I want to, if that is happening, right, there are things that we can do to kind of get this train back on the rails. And then 25% of teens say social media makes them less lonely, right? Feel less lonely. Social media is a double-edged sword, right? So on the one hand, they're saying it makes them feel less lonely, which is true. A lot of teens come in, and when I ask when we're looking at protective factors, they often are saying their online community, and they feel truly very supported by it. And I think as parents, that can feel really scary, right? There's a lot of bad things out there online and social media. And then also for teens, they say it's this juxtaposition, right? Where like maybe their online community is their only source of, they feel deep understanding, and it makes them feel less lonely. And social media portrays life is perfect. It's this highlight reel of reality, and it doesn't show the nitty gritty or anything bad in between. And then it ultimately can affect our self-esteem and how we are living our lives, and increase all of the different types of disorders as far as mental health, eating, addiction, anything like that. So again, ideally, the more teens can talk to us about their experience online, the more you're going to be able to support and guide. All right, what is the goal here, right? So I try to think of a blanketed statement, the open communication. So I don't know why I'm talking so much about brains and synapses and things like that, but it is important to kind of know the background. So, as adolescents are developing, their brain is either flexing their muscles, their synapses, because we're using them, they're getting stronger, or they prune, which means they're being taken away. So if people are not using different synapses, those synapses die, they go away. This is why adolescents are, in quotes, learning machines, right? They learn a lot faster than adults. It's because they have all of those synapses that have not been pruned through the years of time. So when I think of open communication, I think of those synapses, and let's flex them now, right? So let's get them going. Let's fire off as many synapses as possible so that they have them moving forward in life. And again, this isn't going to be one of those things that happen overnight. And depending on the teen, and depending on the context, and depending on the parent, and depending on so many things, open communication can look really different, right? So it often can look like dipping the teen's toes in the waters or dancing around a topic. And how do you, as a parent, know that it's not the full truth, or know that it's not the full thing, and provide this open atmosphere where it allows them to feel empowered to touch on it here and then be okay? You're allowing open communication, right? You're showing that you're patient and that they can come to you moving forward. And it's almost like planting a seed, right? So if you allow them to do this on their own terms, they are, and we're not talking safety concerns, we're just talking open communication. And I can talk a little bit about safety later, but they're dipping their toes, you let it go, it's received well, all of a sudden they remember it's received well, and next time it all of a sudden feels safe to go there again, and they may give you more information. And so it's really, they're, again, very intuitive, and they're watching our responses, they're watching how we talk, they're watching what we do. And I am blown, I'm always, every single day, blown away by these kids' values and their wokeness, right? So I can't even use the term wokeness because I'm not woke, but they are, these kids are, right? So they have ideas, they have ideals, they have values. They are constantly assessing the situation and the culture and who they want to be, and they have all of this going on. And so it's just this open reservoir for parents to be able to tap into, right? To ask open-ended questions and to validate their values or beliefs or know what's going on, right? And sometimes, even I do a lot of supervision with staff. Some people have a hard time with communicating, and it can feel really intense, especially if they're talking about values or beliefs or, something that hits a little bit more closer to home and it's less logistical. And I've even noticed, right, with grown adults, that even having like less intense conversations, maybe where they get to avoid eye contact. So maybe it's like we go on a walk, we do a car ride. It allows them to feel safer to dip their toes in the water about a topic, right? Yeah, so patience, openness, validation. I'm going to come back to that validation piece in a few minutes, but we really just want to flex those synapses. We want to just make sure that they are firing, they're doing everything. And I think I just want to name too, it doesn't mean as parents that we have to agree with everything that these kids are saying or their values or their beliefs, right? And there's a way to validate and have open communication and hold, in quotes, again, kind of a DBT term, but this dialectical stance, where you can support a teen without necessarily approving of it. You can hold these two opposing thoughts or feelings in that moment and still come off as extremely validating and open for them. All right, step one, get on their level. Sometimes teens can see parents as, they won't understand, they don't know anything, they are not woke. And I think this is just something so basic, but just ways of even communicating. Like, I'm not saying you have to be cool and like Snapchat your kid all the time, right? But calling them sometimes can feel uncomfortable, and they don't really talk to their friends sometimes on the phone. And so if you can kind of open the lines of communication, something that feels good to them, and you can even ask them, right? We want to empower how they want to communicate. Texting, DMs, whatever that looks like, it allows them to be kind of in their world and in their comfort zone in order to potentially dip their toes in the water or open up around a topic. Taking an interest in their interests. So just, I don't know anything about Snapchat, and I love asking the teens about it, right? Like, just get an understanding of why is it good? What happens? What are people doing these days? What is that rally going on? Whatever it is, just taking an interest in something that they're passionate about or they're interested in. It could be even a game. I don't know anything about video games, and yet I ask, and they want to tell you, right? They want to share. And all of a sudden you're opening this door of communication, this window. And even though it's not anything heavy, it's setting this foundation of trust. It's setting this foundation of like, oh, wait a minute, my parent isn't like that uncool, or they could talk to me. And all of a sudden, when they're in crisis or when something else is really going on, you already have this foundation built. It's a lot easier to dip their toes in the water or to just open that door that's already been cracked. Quality time, not in crisis. So obviously in RTC, we're dealing, with high acuity issues and behaviors, right? And oftentimes kids are in crisis by the time they come to us. And I think what I've heard from families is they've been in crisis for so long, that's all they know, right? And so I think part of the goal, or part of the, if we're talking about how to communicate with our teen, is really increasing quality time when they're not in crisis. I want to give an example of something that I've seen play out, and hopefully this is helpful for you. So let's say a client comes to RTC with self-harm behaviors. They've engaged in some self-harm in the past, and parents are kind of really aware of these clients' history. And when I collect more information from the family around, what happens when a client self-harms, or what does that look like? How does it play out? What are the triggers? And what's your response, right? Sometimes I'll hear that parents then are obviously very concerned about this kid's safety. And so they're like, oh, well, I dropped everything that I was doing and just supported them all night long. And we ended up like watching a movie and like, reconnecting, which I think probably feels really good in that moment, right? So as a parent, our job is to just we want to ultimately provide safety for our kids, right? And yet sometimes what I see, the message is for the kid, if we don't spend a lot of quality time not in crisis, the kid then associates crisis with quality time. And that's something that we don't want. We really want to break that, right? So it's crisis support is not the same as truly connecting or spending quality time with your kid. And we don't want a kid to feel as though I need to act out or I need to engage in something that's life-threatening or really serious in order to have my parents see me, or in order to spend some time with my parents. It's similar to like kids going from 0 to 60 in order to get their needs met, right? Like they're trying to figure out and assess the world, what works, what doesn't, what is the function of their behavior, and what is the response. Be emotionally authentic. This one's really hard because we are all human and we all have our own emotions and our own responses and our own reactions. And it's this delicate dance of being real with the kid, right? Like they are aware of when we're being authentic or when we're trying to say the right thing. And I'm going to come back to this. So I'm going to leave this at a little bit of a vagueness, but I will come back to it when we're looking at our windows of tolerance. All right. So step 2, once we kind of assess how to kind of open lines of communication, we want to actively listen, empathize, and not offer solutions. So I want to preface this video I'm about to show you. It's really short and it's really ridiculous, but I feel like the metaphor rings true when the woman, let's say, is the adolescent and the man is the adult. So picture that when I play this. Let's see. Hope this works. Hopefully there's no.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can...
Okay, obviously that video is absurd, but I did want to point out, I feel like it really, truly, obviously in a very obvious way, is demonstrating the difference of adults and teens, or more specifically, parents and teens. Again, back to reasons, right? Like my parents just want to fix it. And that also for teens, when parents come in and you may even know the answer. You could actually solve their problem if you just explain it X, Y, and Z. all the time, teens do not want to hear that. They are not ready for someone to fix their problems. They want you, say they're in this hole of sadness or anxiety or frustration or confusion or whatever it is, right? They're in their emotion mind, which is, again, based off of what I was saying earlier, is a place they're very familiar with. They're just looking for you, instead of coming in your rational mind, jump down in the pit with them, right? Be emotional, be understanding, listen. Don't offer solutions and just say like that, tell me more. That is so hard, right? It allows them to, one, feel really validated and heard, and all of a sudden there's this alignment, there's this foundation growing, and two, it allows them to feel empowered to fix their own problems or come up with their own solution. It might not be the solution that you think is the best, and hopefully we can kind of guide them or talk it out or do a pros and cons or whatever that looks like with them once they're feeling more open and they're feeling as though you have aligned with them. But this is going to be key when we're trying to get our teens to talk to us. I think too, right, there's a very fine line between empathizing and sympathizing. And I think there's always, this idea of like intent versus impact, right? Like parents' intent is to provide validation and support and understanding. And often the impact that happens with teens is because maybe you come in and say, look, I was there. Like I also have experienced this, that, and the other, and I got through it, or whatever it is that you're trying to do intentionally to support them. They feel as though the impact is invalidation, or that it's taking away from their actual experience, or somehow you're comparing or trying to fix it for them. And in reality, all they want is for you to share this moment, right? And that's really hard because it goes against our adult instincts when we potentially see solutions. How do you do this? I am pulling from something that we do all the time at RTC, is motivational interviewing. And these are just really basic techniques for how to empathize or how to hold a conversation when someone is talking about something, I'm going to use the term crunchy or challenging or emotional, and because sometimes that can bring up a lot within ourselves. And it's called the OARS. So it's, obviously, again, everything's acronyms, but it's using open-ended questions. So, you're asking like how, the whys. You're not asking a closed question where all the teen has to do is a yes or no response, because then it's going to be pulling teeth and they actually might find that aversive if you're coming in hot with all of these questions. And again, intent is really good. And yet, if you kind of open the door with an open-ended question and you get to kind of see where it goes, all of a sudden that's going to really allow or pave the way of this beautiful conversation that potentially could be happening. Affirmation or empathy. I have another quick video to show you on this. So I'll come back to it. I want to be mindful of time. And then, it's reflective listening. So even if you don't know what to say, which you won't sometimes, just reflect back, be like, man, like I really hear you are struggling right now, or man, that has to be really tough. Or even just kind of summarize, right? That summary reflection. What did they just say around a fight with a friend? And if you're able to summarize it or use your own language, that's going to deepen that kid's understanding of their actual present issues. Hearing it back, oftentimes that's like 80% of therapy. It's just having a safe space to explore issues or process or put it out there, and then have it be reflected back in a way that a teen can conceptualize or maybe deepen their understanding. So I will come back to the Brene Brown and if we have time, and if we don't, I highly recommend looking at it. It's about a 3.5-minute video on empathy versus sympathy. Okay, this is one of my absolute favorite slides, and I think it's one of the most helpful tools in family therapy, and also just understanding ourselves in general. I always start my groups discussing this concept of the window of tolerance. So I'm going to share it here, and hopefully you're able to take something from it. So I always talk, in my DBT groups of, we can't constantly, we can't change or avoid all stressor triggers because we have no idea what people are going to say, what people are going to do, what situation we're going to be in. What we can change or what we can acknowledge or shift is our response to that stressor trigger, right? So when you're looking at, this middle section of the window of tolerance, ideally, whenever there's a stressor or trigger, we're going to stay within our window. And what this looks like is like we're optimally functioning from our mind, from our body. We're feeling cool, calm, collected. Our body's energized, but not too energized. It's baseline. We're alert, but we're not anxious. Our decision making is fantastic. Again, I come back to this concept of wise mind. We are acknowledging our emotions. We're acknowledging our rational thought. We're putting them together and making good decisions, right? The issue is that we're human. We're not robots. There's no way everyone can stay in their window at all times, right? So what often ends up happening is we can either, from the stressor trigger, spike or go above our window into this hyperarousal zone, or we can drop below into this hypoarousal zone. I'm going to just quickly go over what each of those look like. The hyperarousal, and again, I'm thinking of how teens have described it to me, is the fight or flight instinct. Everything in their body, right? So if this is our baseline in our window, everything is firing on all cylinders. So all the alarms in our mind and our body are going off. There is a legitimate threat to our system. This is where we're feeling super overwhelmed, anxious. We might be angry, irritable, lashing out. We often fall back on our destructive behaviors. We're not thinking through decisions. We are extremely impulsive. It's that instant gratification because we aren't attaching our rational mind in this moment. And I'm sure we all have been there at some point, right? And then down below, and I couldn't figure out how to do a squiggly line from the stressor trigger under the hypoarousal, but I really want to highlight this too, that I see a lot in my work with teens, is especially when there's chronic stress or triggers. An example that comes up all the time is school. School in so many ways are extremely stressful for teens. There's the social aspect, there's the academic pressure aspect, there's just having to socialize with people or bullies or whatever that looks like. If there's this chronic stress or trigger, oftentimes a way of protecting themselves instead of hyperarousal, where it's the fight or flight, is this concept of kind of, I guess, freeze. And I always describe it as like your emotional walls of steel are up and you won't let anything in and you don't feel anything, right? So teens, parents, correct me if I'm wrong, you will be like, you notice that something's off or their mood or it's flat affect and you can't figure it out. And you're like, hey, how are you? And they're like, oh, no. And you're like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, clearly something's up. But in their mind, right? So if they're in this hypo-aroused place, their walls are up and they actually may not know how they are. It's the I don't know. Whatever it is, autopilot. They describe themselves as very detached, numb, feeling zoned out. Their body feels lethargic and tired, which is really hard, right? So it's below the window. So you can imagine everything's barely functioning. So either zone, right? I always say we need to recognize within ourselves that we are out of our windows. And this is why this is a great tool in family therapy, right? So if you all can, as a family unit, come up with the identifying things of like, ooh, you know what? I'm actually out of my window or in hyperarousal, or you recognize that your kid is in hyperarousal or hypoarousal or whatever it is. It's not baseline. They're not in their window. This is not the time to try to make a connection with them or process something deep. And the reason is because they're not in their wise mind and you might not be either. I feel I see this all the time, right? Where there's a stress or a trigger. And let's say maybe the stress of the trigger is a kid, your teen comes home from school and had a really big fight and is clearly dysregulated, right? And now you have this terminology, right? You're like, ooh, they are definitely in their hyperarousal state. this is a time where we need to focus on getting back to baseline. Oftentimes, though, it goes against our natural instincts where we want to engage them or we want to like try and support them and process what's going on, right? So maybe you make that reach and you open the door and they try and close the door and you're like, no, we need to talk right now. What's going on? I'm scared. Or like, you need to process with me. What happened at school, right? And you're coming at them, but they're already in their hyper aroused state. The conversation is not going to go well, and they may say something or do something that then actually escalates you. So now they're the stress of the trigger and you're out of your zone. And now you guys are trying to talk to each other and you're missing one another, right? You're not going to see eye to eye. So if you can hold this, the best thing I can say is, one, identify what goes on for you. We're human. We're not always going to be in our window, even though I'd like to say that we are, but we have to be aware of when we're not, right? So if we are having a hard day, and we recognize we're out of our window, be really mindful, right? Like, kids are picking up on how we are responding, and it's okay, right? When we're talking about being emotionally authentic, it's okay to name that. You're modeling that this is human. And ideally, you model, how do you get back into your window, right? So the goal when all of this is escalating, especially in the family unit, is don't process the heavy stuff. Everyone, let's get back to our baseline. Let's get back into our window, however that may be, right? So this is where you really want to rely on skills, self-soothing techniques, distraction techniques, something that's going to bring us back into our baseline. Once we're there, that's when you want to process. That's when you want to reflect. That's where you can have open communication. Okay. Last but not least, I just felt this was important to put in, right? It's okay. And it's not just okay, it's important to hold boundaries as parents. So I hope this webinar isn't all about all the things that you shouldn't do or how to have open communication. And I don't want you walking away feeling like, well, I feel like I can't set boundaries then, or I can't be a parent. This is so key. It almost, sometimes when we feel so disconnected from our kids, we want so badly to feel connected that we actually push away all of our parental instincts and our values. And that's not good either. That's not going to feel good at the end. And that's also not going to teach or help support our teens in growing into their own independent person, right? I'll give an example that I see, again, a lot at RTC, which is families are coming to RTC, right, in crisis. And the family unit is just feeling maybe guilty or hopeless or overwhelmed. Like, how did it get so bad? Or I must have done something wrong to like have it end up here, right? So if these are our core beliefs that like I as a parent am responsible, or that I must have done something wrong, oftentimes I see this, again, pendulum swing into overcompensating for that guilt, right? So these distorted beliefs then impact our own parenting, and all of a sudden our teen is asking for something, and even though your instincts are saying no, that guilt overrides it, and you're like, okay, sure, I'll give you, I material things, or sure, you can go out with your friends, but whatever it is, and it totally shifts the dynamic, right? Where we need to model how to hold emotional and physical boundaries for our kids. And it's really helpful for them to know, hearing the words no and understanding the why behind it, right? The rationale and where we're coming from. That is key in development. That is key in flexing their wise mind muscles, their firing of synapses, whatever that looks like for them, in order for them to then go and create their own healthy boundaries with their peers or with romantic relationships or other family members down the line, right? So we want to model that as parents. It's a lot to kind of unpack the fear and mistrust, and the goal is to rebuild that foundation in a supportive way while holding boundaries and communicating those boundaries, right? Like, why are we putting them in place? So that there doesn't end up being this built up resentment or lack of trust. That will help continue to open the communication between the family members. One other thing too, before we move into questions, it's really helpful opportunities around boundary setting for teens to practice how to respond. So again, back to DBT, oftentimes teens will ask for different things at RTC, and sometimes, even though I'm kind of like, it's not that big of a deal. I'll hold a boundary. I'll explain why there is a boundary, and I'm modeling, right? One, how to communicate a boundary. And then two, it helps them practice healthy coping strategies around hearing the words no, because sometimes no is okay. And sometimes a boundary needs to be held, right? So they have options. And I'll say, like, I know this could be upsetting to hear. And how can we tolerate some distress? How do we slow things down? Let's not react or get into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Let's respond, right? Let's think about the emotion mind, the ration mind come together, and use ways to radically accept it. And radical acceptance, just, I won't go too much into it, but radical acceptance is the teen is not approving of you saying no. And yet they're accepting that that's what it is. It is what it is. And how do they move on so they don't hold this backpack of emotional suffering around with them and they stay out of their window? We want them to be able to tolerate some distress and practice accepting the fact that it's happened, and how do they move on so that they can live the life that they want to. Okay, here are some resources. Again, you all will be getting these this PowerPoint in your emails, again, with the resources. So I won't speak too much of them, but they're really, really helpful to see what other, we have a virtual parent support group that you can register for, and different types of helpful guides and parenting tips for you all. All right, let's see if there are any questions. Okay. Awesome. Well, I will stay on for a few minutes. If there's any questions, feel free to use the Q&A and I will answer to the best of my ability. And I'll just leave this up. So we have our next community workshop on April 28th, Understanding Trauma in Teens. You can register below. Again, I'm Alexa Buffoli. I'm the program director of Evolve in Danville, California. And then if you have any admissions questions, there is the number right there. You can also email them. They're super informative on if you're wondering if, any of these Evolve services would work for you, or if you just have any follow-ups based off of the training today. All right, looks like there's a question. Where do I find your other webinars? Oh, awesome. Okay, so cool. We're getting some. So where do I find your other webinars? Hold on, how do I do this? In the email under resources for parents, I would you can find the other webinars posted. Okay, great question. So someone responded, someone asked the question of how do you respond to a teen who is feeling low, right? So you're maybe observing them in a low state, their flat affect, and I'm going to come back to that hypo-aroused state, and you ask how they are doing, and they say, I don't know, right? And they may honestly not know, right? If they're in hypo-arousal, those walls of steel are up and it's blocking all of the emotions, because the purpose of hypoarousal is if those walls, it's a protective factor, right? It's a survival, because your body or your mind tells you if it goes down, if the walls go down, they may be flooded with overwhelming emotions that they feel like they can't handle, right? So how do you do it, right? So I think this is kind of that expression of jumping down into the hole with them. And you could even name maybe some, like, I feel like you look really flat affect, and I can just tell your energy is low. Sit with them, ask some open-ended questions, validate that it can be hard knowing how someone feels, and see, be like, is there anything that would maybe help you? Or is there anything that like we can do or I can do to support you in these moments? And that might be where you kind of just sit with them for a little bit, or do something that's maybe not too invasive, because they may not be ready to dip their toes in the water to discuss maybe some of the heavier stuff that they're trying to process on their own. And so maybe you do some sort of distraction or something that's lighter, something that allows them maybe to bring themselves from hypoarousal back into baseline in their window. And all of a sudden that's the key, right? Like that's where they're going to be able to process how they're really doing, or maybe have more insight or communication tools attached to it. Hopefully that was helpful. All right, everyone, thank you so much. Again, please feel free to use the resources. And I'm here for you all. Thank you. I hope you have a great day.